Hello, 770 class. This is my TED Talk style video. So my action learning assignment was about military spouse systems awareness, and we're gonna dive right in. So why the military? Why military spouses? This course, probably one of the best parts about this course for me is that it allowed me the opportunity to bridge this gap that I don't normally have the opportunity to bridge between I have like split lives and split personalities really between my academic life and being a PhD student and working with all of you and my military life of being a spouse and an ombudsman and all the stuff I do within the military and all the volunteer stuff and jobs that I have on that side. And so when I first was introduced to this assignment about, working with an organization we're a part of, I realized that so much of what I do within my academic life has to do with USM. And when I was thinking about two major organizations I'm a part of, it was USM and the military. And so I decided to really focus my efforts on my military life. Why spouses? To be completely honest, when I first started this project, I really wanted it to be focused on active duty service members. I thought it would be very cool to kind of get their perspective on how they visualize the military system. There's a lot of differences between the military and the civilian world, especially with how their system is structured. And so I thought that was going to be really neat. I even went as far as just talking with the commanding officer, CO Woods, and he was very much into it. He kind of nerded out a little bit. He wanted to talk about it and he thought it was very cool. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, it was not going to be possible for me to actually implement any sort of training for two reasons. One, probably well over half of the spaces that VP9 occupies on this base are top secret, and you need special clearance to enter those spaces, and I do not have that clearance. And two, when I first started this project and when I had this conversation with CO Woods, they were getting ready to deploy and to leave. And it was a very, very busy time. And he kind of was like, you can try and do a training like outside of base, but it cannot interfere with any of my, service members' work. And it was just such an insane time. I talked with my husband about it and he was like, I just don't see a way you could do this. So to be very frank, that is why I moved to the spouses. I'm really glad that happened. I didn't really realize how important I think this work was going to be. And so that is why military, and that is why spouses. So my planning process. In true Terran fashion, I started with this huge grandiose idea of I'm going to do, all of these trainings and I'm going to teach them everything I know about systems thinking and org learning. And they're going to be, experts by the end. And it's going to be this huge thing. And thank God I had a conversation with Joe. We had a Zoom meeting and he was able to once again bring me back down to earth. There was, put into perspective of, there's a short amount of time, semester is not really that long of a time. And I am also learning at the same time about systems thinking. And, I have to kind of have some realistic expectations about what I can get out of this process. So, I narrowed down my focus a lot to one, include military spouses, but two, I kind of realized that I needed to take like 10 steps back because a lot of spouses don't really have the language to even begin to talk about systems thinking. And I'm not even sure they are aware. There's a lot of rhetoric, both within military spouses and unfortunately outside, where, spouses are kind of seen of like on the periphery and, they're on the home front and there's the language around it makes it seem like spouses are their own thing. So like the military is over here and then their spouses and like, thank God they do what they do so that, the military can do what they do. And it's very much like an us and them type of rhetoric. And there's a lot of spouses that just feel totally powerless. And, it's kind of a joke to roll your eyes when someone thanks you for being a spouse. You're like, okay, whatever. Because you don't really know what that means. So I needed to take a step back and I honestly just had the goal of let's just become aware of the fact and have a discussion around the fact that spouses are a part of this very intricate beautiful system that is the broader military, the Navy, aviation, VP9, all of those things that are intertwined, all these circles within circles, within circles, within circles. Spouses are within that and they have an impact. And so that was my ultimate goal within the planning process. So I did just kind of touch on this, but this is a very poorly drawn diagram of how the military system is kind of organized. So you have the US military, which falls under DoD, Department of Defense. Obviously you have Army, Navy, and Air Force. And within those, there's other smaller branches. The Navy also has the Marines, so on and so forth. The Coast Guard and the Coast Guard, they're under not the DoD, they are under Homeland Defense and different branch. So yeah, you have Army, Navy, Air Force, and then I just filled in the Navy part because honestly, I'm not super familiar with Army and Air Force, but within the Navy, you have surface warfare, you have nuclear warfare, you have intelligence, you have aviation. There's probably 5 others that I'm forgetting, but there's branches within the Navy. Within aviation, you have fixed wing aircraft, you have helicopters, you have jet aircraft. And so those are their own little worlds within aviation, and you can't really see it, but right around here, I'm hoping you can see my cursor, but within fixed wing, there's another little circle, and that's VP9. So within fixed wing, there are 8 squadrons that are stationed either in Oak Harbor, Washington or Jacksonville, Florida. And so there's also those 8 squadrons, so you have VP9. And I could have gone even further into VP9 because VP9 has maintenance, and you have the aviators, and you have the flight officers, and you have stuff within that as well. But I ran out of space for circles. I should have started a little bigger. But the gist is that it's very, the military is huge. But there are circles within circles within circles within circles, and then those circles continue. And it's just a never-ending loop of circles. So this is kind of where my conversation started, or where I wanted the conversation to start. I was hoping that at the minimum, we could get to a place where spouses were able to see how they fit within this system. So my organizational learning strategy. So my participants, to give a little context to the participants, it just so happened that when I was mulling over my learning strategy and what I wanted to do for this, I was already at an event. It's called a Hail and Bail. It's to hail the newcomers, and those bailing and leaving, you say goodbye to them. And it's this big event, and everyone, all officers and their spouses go. It's about twice a year. And so I was already at this event, and I was standing around with like a group of like 8 other spouses, and I kind of asked them, one, is this something you think people would be interested in? Do you think I'm wasting my time or talking to a wall? And 2, do you know anything about this, or anything you'd be interested in talking about? It was very clear. I was met with very blank spaces. What are you blank faces, excuse me. What are you talking about with systems thinking? Like, okay, and kind of some chuckles. So that but there was an enthusiasm of, yeah, let's have this conversation. I think that'd be really cool. But that told me that generally there's not a huge amount of background or contextual knowledge that these individuals have about systems thinking, or greater leadership, or there's just not. So the individuals that I wanted to reach out to were military spouses, but particularly officer spouses. There is kind of spoken and unspoken rules about the enlisted personnel with the officer personnel, and we try and kind of keep those separate. There's a little bit of I hate saying power dynamic, because when the spouses, there really is not a power dynamic. I mean, there kind of is, but not really. But those are separate worlds, and I think both enlisted would feel uncomfortable if an officer's spouse was like, hey, come have a beer with me and let's talk about this. And 2, I think a lot of officer spouses would choose not to participate if they knew enlisted were going to be there, just to kind of protect, you don't want something to come out that then can get back into the workspace, and there's, anyways. So officer spouses. Of the officer spouses that I asked, they're between the ages of 25 and 45, so about a 20-year age gap there. They are all female. Roughly half were college educated, and only 3 individuals in attendance did not have children. And that doesn't include me. There are 3 others who did not have children, so the rest did. Roughly a third worked full-time jobs. And then the educational and professional backgrounds range from physical therapy, kindergarten teacher, dance instructor, corporate recruiter, esthetician, a hairstylist. So there was a good amount of diversity there as far as backgrounds and interests and age and things like that. So that's who the participants were. General layout. So I'll get more into my theory integration. Excuse me, sorry, I just had a brain. I'll get more into theory integration later, but my general layout was I wanted to do a brief introduction about systems thinking. And again, I'll dive into that, talk about what is a system and the systemic structure and what to expect when you're practicing systems thinking. And that was pulled from the 11 laws of the 5th discipline of, Senge 1990. So that was my introduction, basically my only part of kind of running the show. And then I wanted to allow the conversation to flow. I had a series of general questions of, starting off, very simple, like, do you think there is a system? And what does that look like? And I did give an example of a totally unrelated, I used, again, USM. So, USM is part of the humane system, and that's a big circle. And then within that circle, you've got Humane Orono and USM, and you've got Fort Ken and Machias and all these other places. And then within that, you have admissions and student life, and you've got the different colleges. And so I did give that example. And then I asked to kind of, let's talk about the military as a system. What is there similarities, differences? And then we started talking about how we fit within that system. Do we fit? And so the ultimate goal of the conversation was, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I apologize, but I wanted maybe the first third to be me talking and this introduction and let me give you some of the language so we can start having a conversation about it and set the scene almost. But then I wanted a very free flow conversation. I was going to interject if it went totally sideways. But the ultimate goal at the end was I wanted these individuals to become aware that there is a system and an appreciation for the fact that they're a part of that system. They have an effect on that system, that system impacts them as well. It's a mutual relationship. And so that's what I wanted to get out of this process. So round 1, some of you already seen this picture, but this is the photo I took. It's going to be a little bit of a long story, but I'll try and make it fast. So the main mode of communication between all of these spouses is through Facebook. We have a Facebook group and and we use Facebook events a lot. So I created a Facebook event and I invited everyone, literally assuming that 7 or 8 people might come. And so I did that. And again, I'm hoping you can see my cursor, but if not, it is what it is. This individual right here is the XO's spouse, and this individual right here is the CO's spouse. And they all gave me permission to post this picture, by the way. And they saw the event that I was going to have, and it's at the O Club, the Officers Club. It's at the Officers Club that we took place. And they reached out to me separately and asked if they thought it was a great idea. They asked if at the end they could come and give some announcements about deployment. I, in hindsight, should have said no, but I didn't. I said that was fine. And it turned out the announcements they had about deployment was the order in which our spouses were going to be deploying, which meant the time we were going to find out the day that they were going to deploy. And it was where the location they were going to be going, because some individuals were going on detachments. Well, most everybody is going to this one main location. And so we were going to find out where our spouses were going for the next 6 months and when they were leaving. So it's huge. That's, obviously everyone's very curious about that. So I said, yes, they could come and they could give that announcement, but I prefer for them to come at the very end. I said that, this was going to be held from 6 to 7 o'clock. And I was like, if you could show up at 6:45, that'd be great. blah, blah, blah. We had a good conversation. So they then went on the Facebook event and posted, come to Taryn's event. At the end, we're going to be giving you information about deployment. Suddenly, 18 individuals said they wanted to come. So one, I was not prepared for that many people to show up. Two, I got the impression that a majority showed up because they knew what was going to be happening at the end. So in a lot of ways, my event kind of got railroaded. However, as you can see, there's upsides and downsides. The upside was a lot of people came, and that was great. And the conversation was very fruitful because there was a lot of people to kind of go back and forth. It was not stagnant at all. People were very enthusiastic about it and very passionate about it. And I actually thought overall it went pretty well. The downside is that, again, the CO and XO's spouses showed up maybe 10 minutes after we started, and everyone was very distracted a lot of the time. It was kind of hard to get people to focus again on the conversation. So unfortunately, round one, had some ups and downs. I think for sure it was great that I got to reach so many people that they showed up. There was some good things that came out of the conversation. There was like kind of, there was a good healthy debate about whether or not spouses are inside or outside the system. There definitely were people who originally, when they first came in, definitely had the opinion that they were not part of the military system, that they are outside of it. And it actually is funny that one person said, if you're outside the system, why would you be given a military ID? Like, why do you get granted access to base that other people don't get access to? So it must mean that you're part of the system. And then we, got even deeper and started, talking about, how important like spouses have everything else, like their active duty service members' only job is their job. And the spouse has to take on literally everything else, and everything we do allows them to do their job. And that we are in the system, and the system would completely collapse. It was kind of a joke, but not really. The system would collapse completely if spouses did not do what they do. If they just didn't exist, it would not work out anymore. And so that kind of started the spiral of conversations of like how important our role is, and where we see ourselves in that system. So it was really good. And judging by how, I could tell that there was an improvement because the conversation at the very beginning, probably half of the spouses there were kind of in agreement and nodding about how they're not part of the system or there is no system. And by the end, there was almost a consensus of like, go us, high five, we rock. And I really, really liked that. So it wasn't a total failure. I wish it had gone a little better, but it was not a total failure. So that was my first round. Round two, I did not get a picture of it. I apologize. But round two was a lot smaller. I kind of cherry picked some spouses rather than doing a Facebook event. I reached out to 10 individuals, asking if they were free on a particular night to go grab some food at a local restaurant and continue the conversation. 5, I was the 6th. 5 showed up for the actual conversation. And this went much better. One, because they had already heard my introduction. Those 5 were at the first round. And so I could totally basically skip that part. I did a 30-second reminder of what the conversation was, almost like meeting minutes. And then we had a really good conversation. What was very interesting, which honestly, I didn't even think about. And this one individual, she's not going to care if I tell you her first name. Her first name's Cynthia. She brought up the fact that, for her, what's also interesting is she kept thinking about that by the time we had round 2, our spouses had deployed. This was probably 2 weeks after they had deployed and they'd been gone. So she thought about, she's like, after I said goodbye to my husband, a couple of days later, I started thinking, now that the entire squadron physically moved locations, like it's across the ocean. It no longer exists in Oak Harbor, Washington. Physically, their space is taken over by another squadron. Their chairs and desks and decorations are all gone with them. That's just how it works in the military. So they physically moved. And so she was like, she's like, I'm wondering if that means that she's like, do I picture it as like the system's physically, geographically larger? I'm having an impact here at home still, but I'm also having an impact where they are in an entirely different country. Or is it that the system just doesn't exist here anymore because they're not physically here? And we had this whole very interesting, very fruitful conversation about that, about deployment and the system's location change. Because again, that's something that doesn't happen very often in the civilian world. An entire corporation doesn't just one day pick up and move for 6 months and then come back 6 months later. I mean, sometimes, but not really. So that was also very cool. And then of course we got into this long conversation about emotional state and how, especially right now, it's a little depressing, but with the current events that's going on in our world, OPSEC, operational security, I can't really say too much, but our spouses are in it. And they're doing a very scary job right now. They're not just hanging out and they're not entirely safe. And so we kind of talked about our job now is even more important. We have even more of an impact and an influence on the system because in some ways it's our job to be the sounding board for them. It's our job to be the shoulder they can lean on, to be the emotional support. There are times when, of course, we're frustrated, we're alone, and we've got all the weight of the world on our shoulders, but you can't really call up your spouse and unload all of your emotional baggage on them right before they're about to fly because they have a mission. And so in a lot of ways, you carry even more of that burden when they're deployed. And so then we moved into this conversation about, during deployments, we have even more of an impact on that system, and we are even more important within that system. And so, yeah, it was another really great, I even found myself becoming more proud of the fact that I'm a spouse and aware of the impact I have within VP9 and the greater military. So it was a great, great conversation. I think round 2 went so much better. So there's that. So theory integration, first and foremost, I think everyone at this point knows that I'm obsessed with Peter Senge. I used his 5th discipline text and the field book. The field book helped inform the basis for my introduction presentation. I kind of broke down introducing the concepts of systems thinking, as well as providing basic language. And the field book really helped inform how I should explain that to someone who isn't familiar. So I used the field book for that portion for round 1 when I did that, 10, 15 minute, time it, but 15, 20 minute-ish introduction. TheoryU, I used, and I'm gonna, so for TheoryU, it was all about environment. TheoryU spoke to me about how to create a learning environment that allows participants to address a root question or, be more creative, focusing on the self and the work and what that looks like. And so I was very keenly aware of the environment that I wanted participants to be in. I wanted them to be comfortable. I wanted them to feel like they were in a safe space. I didn't want it to be too stuffy. I really wanted it relaxed, and, grabbing a glass of wine and, is a way to do that. But I also wanted their headspace to be the fact they were in the system. I was kind of strategic about not doing it at one of our houses, about doing it on base. Because then they were physically in the environment where the system exists. Where we first thought the system existed. Of course, the system is way outside of base and it's everywhere, but especially now in the virtual world. But having them need to drive to base and go to the officers club, and we are at NAS Whidbey Island while we're having this conversation, I thought it might be a little more convincing to people to say, how can you say you're outside of the system? Look at where you're standing right now, So that's, TheoryU, Scharmer 2018 really helped inform why environment is so important. And then finally, organizational learning from Schwandt and Marquardt 2000. For that, it was reflection. I do have here, I'm just going to read this quote because honestly, I don't think I can say it better, but it kind of informed the direction I wanted the conversation aspect of both rounds to go. So it says the organization can employ 3 different perspectives in its reflection. 1, it reflects on the process used in their actions. This is the how we do things. 2, it reflects on the context or results of its action. This requires the answering questions of cause, effect, relations, or the what we do. And the 3, the deepest perspective that organizations can reflect at is the underlying premise of their actions. This requires answering questions about why they do what they do or did. So the who, what, and why is kind of how, I started with the how, the what, and the why is how I organized how I wanted the conversation to go. And so org learning, Schwandt and Marquardt definitely informed that. So here I am. Overall, I think it is a success story. I definitely can see that I created an awareness of systems thinking, but more importantly for me, an appreciation of the impact that spouses have on that system. It was definitely improved. I won't say it's perfect. I won't say it was fully achieved, but the conversations were great, especially round 2, at least with those 5 other individuals that joined me for dinner that time. It was greatly improved, and it was a really great conversation. Conversation was very fruitful. And there's lots of enthusiasm from the spouses. I've actually since then been asked a couple of times if we're going to do kind of a round 3 or a round 2 of the first round when everyone came, if we could kind of continue that conversation. So I probably will in the future. I actually think this is really great work. It's really important, especially at least for VP9 right now, because of what's happening. It's incredibly important for them. So future goals and implications, again, this is just a start. I think I didn't even scratch the surface, to be honest. I'm not even sure I've touched the surface yet. So this is a very first step. So yeah, I really want to continue the conversation. And then maybe I want to move, stick with the spouses for a little bit, but eventually I'd actually really like to try again and move on to active duty military and kind of get their perspectives, maybe even their perspectives of an appreciation for what their spouses do within the system. I can kind of bridge that as well. So that's where I want to go moving forward. And those are my references. So thank you all very much. I hope that this was a fruitful presentation.